Hello. You are listening to the Carroll Connection with your host, Jared Carroll.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Carroll Connection. I'm your host, Jared Carroll, here to bring you guys another great episode. I did want to take a chance to shout out my last episode, episode 186, publicly versus privately, where I discussed the concept of sharing things on social media. And as maybe some of you know, I've had struggles with dealing of whether I share too much on social media, whether I share not enough on social media, trying to decide that fine line. And as content creators, I know we do all struggle with figuring out what's appropriate to share online, and I kind of dive into my own personal struggle with that and figuring out what works for me and what doesn't, and how I've changed over the years. And I think it's a relatable episode for anyone that does content or anyone that's interested. So you can check that out at thecarrollconnection.simplecast.com. Also available Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all the major listening platforms. And if you want to watch the podcast, go on YouTube, search the Carroll Connection or at Jared M. Carroll, and it should pop up for you. And if you want to be a guest or return as a guest, hit me up on Instagram at Jared M. Carroll or at the Carroll Connection, and we'll set that up. And for anyone that was wondering where I was or haven't been posting, I went to Portland, Maine a couple weeks ago with my girlfriend. You could see that on Instagram, or if you have me on Facebook, I posted some pictures, and it was a really great time. And I had a guest last week that rescheduled, so I didn't want to make content because, like I said, I don't like doing solos that much. So I try not to do them too often unless I really feel called to do them. So I just not going to force episodes this year. So that is the explanation for why I missed a couple weeks. So diving into today's episode 187 with Lexi. If you want to introduce yourself, first name and last name.
Okay. My name's Lexi Milich. I am a holistic lifestyle guide. I have horses, which is really cool. We have a retreat farm in Rehoboth, and we're going to be doing a family business.
Perfect. And we could dive into that more as we get into the podcast. I know there's a lot of details that are going to go into that. And even like your whole social media page caught my eye when I was looking, because I've been following you for a few years. And as I've seen you kind of grow on social media, I was like, you lined up perfectly. And I mean, we had a great pre-interview. We were talking for almost an hour and a half, just diving into different spiritual aspects of life and stuff. So I'm really excited for this conversation. Like I told you off podcast, I like to get into family dynamic first. Mm-hmm. And for any new listeners, I always like to explain kind of why I do that. And I always use this analogy is when we're building a house, we think of the foundation first. And for a lot of us, I'd say for pretty much all of us, our family is the foundation, whether it's for better or for worse, or whatever the circumstance may be. Talking about our family is important when we're going to talk about your life story here on the podcast. So I always find it important to ask the question at least and allow the guest to go into this. So whatever you're comfortable with sharing, I'll let you go into your family dynamic.
Yeah. Well, to start off, my mom has been super influential with so much in my life. She almost is like a therapist to me without actual therapy. She is a life coach too, so I think that has a lot to do with how she is. But she has guided me throughout my whole journey in life. My dad and I are really close. We actually have always been together with horses. So our connection there has been through horses and growing that way. But I am very close with my mom and my dad. I do have a half brother and a half sister. Unfortunately, I do not talk to them. And I also do not talk to my dad's side of the family, but everybody has family issues and whatnot. But yes, my family dynamic is very strong between my horses, my dog, and my mom and my dad.
Yeah, and seems like the relationship with your mom is very important to you.
Extremely.
And if you feel comfortable diving into that, I'd love to know more about that, because I've seen, I believe she followed the podcast page, and I was checking out a little bit of her content, and aligns exactly with what you're kind of presenting, and even the brand. And I was like, this could be a possible guest in the future one day if she's ever interested. But
definitely,
I would love
the business we're building.
Too. Yeah. And I'd love to hear more about your relationship with her and what she kind of means to you.
Yeah, well, my mom means the world to me. She has made me step out of the most she's made me become the person I am and guided me through so many modalities. Like I get emotional talking about it because she has shown me like this my spiritual path. Um, she's allowed me to gain confidence, and because I being on this podcast in one, she's told me that I could do it. So not doing it here with her and doing it alone, but knowing that she's guided me through everything to this point where I'm able to do this and step out of my comfort zone has shown me so much of the person that she is today and myself too. So,
Yeah, you got to give yourself a lot of credit
yeah.
for wanting to do this. I know
Yeah.
when I offered it, sometimes people are just really nervous about doing something like
I'm
this.
very nervous, but it's okay. It's okay. Like this is what I do. I step into the unknown, you know.
Yeah, and
So,
it's a chance to try something completely different.
yeah.
Obviously, this is your first podcast, correct? So
Yes.
it's like it's a new experience on social media, and you get the cameras and everything included, and it's
Mhm.
just it's a new thing, and it's a chance to talk about the great things that you're trying to accomplish in your life, whether
Yeah.
it's your personal life or the business. And I
Mhm.
think this episode kind of is going to embody that conversation of the spiritual growth that you've kind of gone through, and we even talked about off podcasts
Mhm.
that I'm really excited to dive into. But the relationship that we have with our mothers is one of the most powerful ones that we can have. And I always say the
Mhm.
way that I feel connected to my mom, if I showed you a picture of her when she was a kid, like a baby, a toddler, and then showed you my baby pictures,
Mhm.
everyone says we're like twins. And
Yeah.
I really feel like I'm the most connected to her out
Mhm.
of like my brothers. And we just connect on the
Mhm.
emotional level, the
Yes.
intellectual level, and the way that we can just have conversations. And obviously, she's my mom, so she can make me feel at peace in certain
Yes.
circumstances. And obviously, in other circumstances, that can drive her crazy.
Yep.
But I think
Definitely.
that's part of the
Me and my
dynamic.
mom are we can be very stubborn, but we're a lot alike. And I just feel like with what we're doing in like holistic lifestyle, it stems a lot from ancestral healing. So, you know, like whatever my mom has taught me, I have to go through like those breakthroughs as well. But she's also done a lot of work on herself where it made it a lot easier for me to go through that type of healing within.
Yeah, have you guys had that conversation with one another about the ancestral healing and stuff like that?
Yes.
And
Yes,
um,
and then my grandma and how it stems from
like
my grandma
generational
has
curses type thing almost? Like,
yes,
could you go
yes.
into that for people who might not know what that type of stuff is?
Yeah, how do I start this?
It's a kind of big topic, but you brought it up,
Yeah,
and I actually enjoy this type of stuff too. So
yeah, what my mom has gone through in her life is actually, like, a serious reflection of what I've gone through. Like, it's such a mirrored I can't even explain how mirrored it is, but every time I take a step forward or grow, it almost like it's like a catapult effect between the two of us because it's in our DNA. And I feel like it stems back from like ancestral like times as well. Does that make sense?
yeah, I'm following. I'm following.
Um, but if you're willing to go inward and do the growth, it will show and break those generational curses. Um, and I don't know fully how to explain like on a deeper level about the generational curses
Yeah, it's how.
because I feel like I'm like having a hard time.
Yeah, because I kind of like what it is.
It's in your
I've heard,
DNA.
yeah, it's sometimes it's
It's
the
like a
stuff.
reprogramming.
Yeah, you do have to
Yeah.
like reprogram a lot of the stuff that we're taught, and that gets passed down through also genetics and
Yes.
stuff like that. And a lot of the traumas that your relatives and your family members go through, especially the unhealed ones, get
Yes.
passed through genetics.
Exactly.
And
Yes.
I don't think enough people truly acknowledge those things, that the stuff that they might be battling might not even be something that they're truly battling. It's stuff
Mhm.
they're battling from their
From their
ancestors.
ancestors. And
And
that's where like embodying the feelings and that's where like the chakra system and all of that comes into play. Yeah.
yeah, and I don't think enough people are willing to even tap into this, because
Yeah.
this gets into the conversations where a lot of people get frustrated with like religion versus
Mhm.
spirituality, and you could argue they're the same thing.
Mhm.
You could be spiritual and
Mhm.
religious, and there's no difference between
Mhm.
those two things. And I think a lot of people struggle with that
Yep.
concept, and especially in this generation where I've said a lot lately on the podcast that I think a lot of the issues that we face in society is because we're lacking that spiritual
Yep.
religious guidance from
Mhm.
whether it's our elders or the people in power. We're missing this fundamental
I think
piece.
too, like there's restriction, like in a lot of elements of like how people think. And there's so much more than just one thing, like spirituality is like a whole, like we are whole, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't.
Mind, body, spirit.
Yeah. They focus on body and don't
Yes.
really think about the
Yes.
mind or spirit sometimes. And then even when I was telling you about like my journey through my fitness stuff, I got my body focused first, and then the mind started to come, and then started getting more in tune with the spiritual side, and that's a lifelong journey itself. So
People
it's like,
used to ask me all the time how much, like how I shifted from being, because I was like 20 pounds over, and I was struggling with my weight. I was having like hormonal problems, like a ton of things were happening. And people, when I started getting more into my spirituality, like my spiritual part of my journey, a lot shifted for me. Where like people saw in my physical body that like, oh wow, you're like she's changing, but they were like, oh, did you just eat healthier? Like, no, I did a lot of inward reflection and healing that my mom has guided me to believe and trust in myself.
yeah.
So,
I mean, as soon as you came into the podcast, like I mean, for me, it felt like a good energy, and I could tell it was going to be a good podcast. Even
yeah,
leading up to this week, I just knew it was going to be a good podcast. I just get hopeful to make sure that the guest doesn't reschedule. I'm like, I
yeah.
knew it was going to be a good one. It's
No,
just
I'm
long
going
as
all the way in. I'm going,
yeah.
regardless of how nervous I am, I'm going to do it. Like, that's the bravery part of me. Yeah.
And I love to hear that, because anyone that can sit across from me on the podcast, I always like applaud them for doing that, because it's a courageous thing to do. Because for a lot of people, they don't know me, and you're putting yourself and your story in front of cameras, in front of people and an audience, and that's a scary thing to do. And
Yeah.
especially our society where people can judge and critique and say
Yeah.
whatever they want to say, but it's who cares about those people at the
Yeah.
end of the day when you're the one chasing your life? Like, they
And your
can't live it.
story and yeah, it's like it makes you happy and it makes you abundant. Like, just go for it. You know what I mean?
And if you feel called to do certain things, it's, and I've said this a lot lately on the podcast and certain aspects, even with this podcast, and I'm working on this side project that I'll talk to you a little bit after the podcast when we're wrapping up and stuff, to make this make sense. But when the podcast was happening, it almost like felt like I was called to do it. Like, you just gotta like trust it. You
have
don't
to just
know.
trust within yourself and whatever you believe in, as we were talking about religion, but God or the universe, but mostly trust within yourself that you can do it. You know what I mean?
It's intuition. And
It is intuition. It's embodiment, intuition, and the rest will follow.
Yeah, it's
As long as you keep stepping into the uncomfortable and moving
Yeah.
forward, it gets easier.
It's the hardest part is tapping in and trusting the intuition, because like
Yes.
when you've gone through so many different toxic things, and even when we go back to the generational curses stuff, when that's kind of programmed into you to have that fear almost, it can be hard to reconnect with what you're actually feeling. And it takes going through bad things to reconnect with yourself. And as unfortunate as that is, it is kind of the truth. Like, to see someone to be so spiritually whole, usually they had to go through something
lot
that
of
had to break
hardships.
them. Yeah. And it's the breaking of that person that allows the new self to be born into who you truly want to be. And those spiritual journeys are dark and scary, and but it takes the person to go through those, and you're gonna go through them. You're gonna make it to the other side, and it takes believing in that self. And it's hard to believe in yourself when things are so dark and scary. But for me, I've always had that like just belief that things are always going to be okay no matter what.
And resiliency.
You just gotta.
I
I
feel
don't
like
know what
my
I trust
mom
in.
has
Yeah,
shown me how resilient that she was, that it's empowered me to do that within myself, within the dark times that I've had or the hardships.
it's
you know.
hard. Yeah,
And I'm a very emotional person. So like
same,
if there
yeah.
like I have to let it out, you know what I mean? And I think vulnerability is like your biggest strength, especially in this world we live in, because like we are shown not to be vulnerable, but like also the resiliency aspect of like you can bounce back from anything. Like life is not linear. You know what I mean? Like life is very like all over the place.
100%. And that's something I've constantly struggled with, is the vulnerability aspect of things. I just need to say the thing. Like, if I have something like that's like on my conscience, I can't not say it.
I'm the same way.
That's probably why we like easily were able to like resonate with one another and have the
Yeah.
conversation right away. It's
Like
like,
have an open conversation. You can tell when someone's closed off, you know what I
yeah,
mean?
I mean, I've done this podcast enough too to know that as
Yeah.
well, on top of just living. But
Yeah.
when someone's not willing to go into a topic, so yeah, we don't have to. It's totally fine.
Yep.
But like, you could read a person's energy and like the
Mhm.
body language and
Mhm.
everything to know where they're willing to go with a certain
Mhm.
topic, and um, to know that you were willing to have that vulnerable conversation even post pre-podcast, and it was going to lead to a great podcast.
Mhm.
But that aspect is something that you hit on. That's a huge thing in society that we're lacking, is the ability to be vulnerable. And you see people try to do it on social media, and I don't think everyone is able to tap into it because the criticism, the
Mhm.
scariness of people throwing negative comments at you. And there's never been a time in history where this many people have access to your personal life
Mhm.
story. Like,
People
typically,
don't know you unless they know you, like, on a
yeah,
personal level, and I'm still getting through like, my whole journey, I feel, is a lot about self-confidence, considering my mom's was the same very similar. So, putting myself out there is definitely putting me in a vulnerable state, but I also know who I am now after the hardships and the dark times that I've been through, that, like, regardless, I'm gonna, like I said, kind of bounce back to the person that I know I am.
yeah,
Yeah.
hardships, they don't define you. They can help make you though.
Yeah, they
Eh,
really have strengthened everything about who I am.
I say the who I am wouldn't be the same without all the stuff I've gone through along
Mhm,
the way, whether it's bad relationships, losing family
mhm,
members, even going back to losing my family pet. Like, even that was
mhm.
such an emotional heartstring.
Yes.
But like, all these different like unique life experiences shape us to where
Mhm.
we're supposed to go and help you align with your true self. And
And that's where the growth is, and that's where, like, I just see, like, blossom, like, there's so much. I mean, like, it reminds me of your podcast, like, the brain in it.
yeah, I always say like it's hard to see it when you're living it, but
Yeah,
like I always say just give it 5-10 years of this podcast, and
yeah.
I think the true value, and obviously there's tons of value. I'm here with you having this conversation. We're getting value from the conversation and the stuff. But I think in the future is where we're going to get more value from this, in the
Mhm,
sense that like, or even the people listening, we're going to be able to look and reflect on the
mhm,
conversation where we've been. And it's literally like taking a screenshot of time, but you're able to speak on it and you're able to
mhm.
hear your thoughts and hear what you're talking about and hear where you want to
And where
go.
you were at that point
Yeah.
in your life.
And I
Yeah.
think that's like one of the coolest things that like
You
it's
could see your
hard.
growth from there.
Yeah, it's
I
hard
feel
to
like that
appreciate.
too, like, on your podcast, you're able to look back at all the episodes and be like, "That was such a pivotal point," and I'm sure we talked about this before. Yeah,
It's like I could see like every
your
person that
growth.
sat across from me too. I could picture that person, picture that moment, picture what was happening in my life at that time.
Yes.
And it's so weird to think when I scroll through my Instagram on the podcast page and see all the different guests, and I'm like, that was like a year ago. That was 2 years
Mhm.
ago. Like it's so crazy to see that,
You're your
and
biggest supporter.
you have to
You
be.
know, you
You
have
really
to
do
be.
have to be. And I can imagine with what you and your family are doing with the business, that you guys have to buy in the most. Like, you have to believe in this stuff more than anybody, because
Mhm.
at the end of the day, if you guys don't believe in it, how are you going to have a
How are we
business?
gonna move through and push forward to make it a family dynamic business?
Yeah, and that's such
Yeah.
a unique thing on top of that, is the family dynamic
Mhm.
of running a business. And since we're kind of on that family dynamic topic, like how has that been running
Yeah.
a business with your family?
Um, so it's been very pivotal. We've had to take kind of like 2 years off. My mom had some things happen. She previously owned a business, but it was without me before I went into like my spirituality and started going through the ancestral healing is where I like stepped in.
Mhm,
But she had a lot of sabotage. There was a lot going on
mhm.
and past self of hers, but um we've moved past that, and a year ago my dad was in the hospital. Um so it definitely was a very difficult time, and that's where the hardships come in. And I was going through a really significant breakup of 7 years. So, um, we've had to put it aside, but also know that in divine timing and in time, like, it will come back and realign, and believe it or not, through the chaos and the reconstruction of it all, um, it's almost, like, beautiful how, like, things come back together. and we're finally starting to like come back as a family, like whole. Like we had to go within mind, body, spirit, each of us, to be able to like bring it back to the business. Does that make sense?
Yeah. That's actually really beautiful that
Yeah.
and I actually really resonate with the fact of like it coming back together. Like
Mhm.
going to different points, whether it was this podcast or stuff that I'm working on, sometimes you have to like put it aside and focus on other things and trust that.
Trust the process.
Yeah, you got to trust the process.
Mhm.
You got to I was saying, I forget what podcast I said this on, but you just got to let life happen.
Mhm.
Like if you can trust
the
it.
one thing. Because when things start happening like that, you think you have control. You know what I mean? And I had to full surrender
It's
throughout all of
full
it.
surrender is the key.
But like now I'm at a point in my life where like I'm just going with life and what flows with me. And it's actually more abundant than it is to rush your process and like instead enjoy the journey. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Instead
yeah.
of like rushing something that isn't here yet, but you know you've already like manifested.
Yeah, 100. And that's like the hardest part
The bigger
about
dream.
manifestation is like to let it go after
Yeah.
you've kind of manifested. And they talk about this with even the law of attraction is like when I have a vision board. Like I've done it.
Mhm.
I did one with my girlfriend. We did a split one where
Yep.
we had split into threes. We had one was my side, one was her side, and then one was like a joint together thing.
Mhm.
And
Oh, that's beautiful.
the key with and I've done vision boards 3 other times
Mhm.
where you put it there, you know it's there, but you kind of have to
Mhm.
forget it a little bit
Mhm.
and just keep doing what you're doing.
Mhm.
Because if you're constantly, I'm not hitting the things I want my vision board,
Yes. And
then
that goes back to business and
yeah,
yeah.
you'll
Yep.
reject it almost, and it's not going to come to you because whether it's the universe, God, whatever,
Mhm.
is going to deem you not ready for a thing.
Yep.
So you can't constantly be worrying about if certain thing
Mhm.
is going to happen. You just have to let it
Mhm.
happen, and it'll happen when it's supposed to happen. And it's
Mhm.
not going to happen the way you think it's going to happen.
No,
It's going to be completely different.
absolutely not. Who would have thought I would have been heartbroken? My dad near death experience in the hospital, and then my mom going through. My grandmother was also diagnosed with Alzheimer's, so it's like we were all going through so much destruction at once, and now it's like a year from now. I'm here sitting on this podcast. I'm talking about it, and I'm like, but I'm like, we're past that now, and we're like actually developing more of a business strategy, and we were going to events at the time, like during the heartbreak and during all of that. Like it's crazy to think and reflect back that we were still doing the things, but like it not fully working out the way we wanted it to just because other things had to happen for it to like be the bigger dream, the bigger picture.
Yeah.
And I still trust that it will continue because if you don't have faith and if you don't believe in the bigger dream, like it won't come to fruition.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
totally agree with that. Is like you have to have like goals, plans, a vision for
Mhm.
yourself and what you want to aspire. But you also have to do the day-to-day stuff too. Like
Mhm.
there's certain things like you have to just get done.
Mhm.
Like you can't like
You have to have structure.
yeah, you got like
Um,
I know a lot of people are gonna be frustrated with like their day job sometimes like that. Like we all have had to work jobs we don't like, but like
I bartend.
yeah,
So I'm currently bartending 5 days a week. And I enjoy it. I do enjoy it. I mean, I deal with the public, so anyone who deals with the public knows that it's not easy and you have to have a lot of boundaries, but it's taught me so much being a bartender. Um, and I have a leisure lifestyle. Like I'm able to travel and I was able to find myself bartending, I feel.
yeah, that
While
makes a lot of sense because it's a
yeah.
very you, you
Like I
know
have
the
my
schedule too,
days.
and you can take the time off to do what you need to do with your
Yeah.
family or your business and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
it's not as like I'm in the 9 to 5 world, so like this is
Yeah.
a very like it's hard to get out
Structure.
of that
Mhm.
structure. Like you know what you're supposed to be doing when you're supposed to
Mhm.
doing. You're allotted only a certain amount of time. Like this, there's a box to it.
Mhm.
Like you're kind of in a
I think
box.
too, like my mom has allowed me to grow in like again going back to my mom, but she's able to like I've been home, so I live home, and I don't need to like be forced out. Like she's always said, like I want you to grow because we're gonna make this a bigger vision. You know, the whole family dynamic business, and she's allowed me to sit back and like really get to know myself and I think too, like, I wasn't forced into like a 9 to 5 job. Like some families like make you, pay for rent, do this. Like I'm fortunate enough that I had support from my mom,
Mhm.
on like a deeper level.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, not saying my life was easy and by any means, like it has not been, but just a different learning experience.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
uh, to build off that and kind of regroup to the growth steps of the podcast and get to your
Yeah.
obviously where you are now. Obviously, we jumped a little bit because we went into that tangent, but it's totally fine.
Yeah.
But like the sense with like growing up and stuff like that.
Mhm.
Um, what kind of hobbies and sports did you do, and how did that kind of translate to obviously you growing up? Was there lessons? Were there friendships that helped? Like what kind of helped during those childhood years into kind of like high school? And we'll kind of keep building with that.
So I've been riding horses since I was 5. I did a lot of competition, meaning like I went to shows, horse shows. I developed a relationship with my horse, with my trainer, and I was recognized for being like a very good rider. But I never took it for like advantage because I had to work for what I wanted. When I would see like people win ribbons just because they paid a groom to do their to brush their horse for the horse show. Like I did all of that myself and with the support of my parents. So I was very much into that type of the horse world until I hit college, and I went for 2 years um to UNH, and I studied equine business management. And at that point, like I just felt burnt out from horseback riding. And I ended up switching schools completely because I'm like, this is not, I don't want to train horses for a living. Like, this is not, I just got burnt out from it. And I took a long time off of horses. And it was definitely a sad time for me. But I was in a relationship. Like, there was just other things going on that took more of the forefront than horses in my life.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
like as we said throughout the podcast, sometimes you have to go through these things too,
Mhm.
and like that burnout feeling. And I mean, even probably in the future with your business, you're gonna feel burnout. I
Mhm.
mean, there's days in this podcast where I'm like,
We're
man, I
always
don't want to do it.
trying to find harmony and balance within ourselves and the outside world.
Yeah, it's the
Yeah, it's the
constant.
wholeness.
Yeah, and you're also trying to balance between living your life, running a business, and like keeping in tune with yourself. Like it's
Mhm.
hard to do everything at
And
once.
having those hobbies still and like enjoying yourself, like, and that's part of the reason why like lifestyle coaching is something I've been drawn to.
Yes, and so
Yeah.
are you trying to start to look into that a little bit more and stuff?
Yes. I have done a few. So again, kind of like my mom says to me, like I already am lifestyle coaching in my everyday life, just like you're holding space for people on a podcast. But I haven't fully had clientele yet. And I think that's where the discouragement in myself, that's just like a self confidence building thing for me. But I'm learning how to step into that more and know that I'm already doing it
Mhm.
because that's like my life purpose. Um, and I've gone through, like I said, it's been like a whole journey with my gut health, with learning my like the burnout phase, the heartbreak, like it's all of those check off my list, that I've gone through
Yeah, and it
that have
seems
shown
like
me to.
a lot of this stuff was kind of always there, but a
Yeah.
lot of it since like after the college experience, after the post breakup stuff, and a lot of the stuff with your family,
Mhm.
your personal family matters, where a lot of this is really starting to unfold. So, like, where did the holistic stuff started coming in? I know you mentioned off air, like Reiki and stuff like that. Like,
Yeah.
where did this stuff really start to come into play?
Yeah. So this was, I want to say when I was in my relationship with my ex-boyfriend. But 3 4 years ago, 3 years ago, I got Reiki certified. I think it's been 3 years. And that's what started my deeper energy healing modalities and kind of just diving into like my spirituality. And I'm a type of person that like will go right in and like sometimes fall in a rabbit hole with it. But you have to go sometimes to the extreme to like do you know what I mean by that?
Yeah.
Like you have to go all the way in to find the balance and harmony. So yeah, I started there. And
I actually want to build off that point right there. 'Cause
Yeah,
I think
I could tell.
because
Yeah.
that actually like really hit home with me was
Yeah.
to the going to the extreme with stuff. Like for me on the podcast and my personal Instagram page, my thing was always feel your feelings.
Mhm.
And being brought up the way that I was brought up was like playing sports, traditional masculinity, just you don't
Mhm.
cry, you don't express yourself. This is what we do. Um, and I bought into that for most of my life. I didn't express myself. I held things within. I
Mhm.
didn't express that part of me. And that is a huge part of me.
Mhm.
And that obviously was pushed down for a long part of my life. And then um, as I started to discover the podcast, I'd gone through some life experiences and I told you about the whole situationship in 2020.
Mhm.
And in that period of time was where this podcast and the feel your feelings things was really blossoming, where it became, I'm going to feel my feelings to the extreme. I don't care what anyone else feels about their feelings. And I'm just going to express myself.
Mhm.
And
And at the time, that's kind of what you need to do.
yeah.
That's where your growth, like, again, we talked about this. That's where your growth is. Yeah.
And I found that for me, the balance between having that masculine traditional side with this feel your feelings like feminine energy almost to it, it's the middle where I
Mhm.
needed to live to
That's the
know
yin and
that.
the yang.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I've definitely learned a lot about when I was going through my spiritual development. I learned a lot about feminine and masculine energies and how within a relationship I was more in my masculine, like always caregiving for somebody else and not putting enough into me. And I've also, it's a learned behavior from, and that's where ancestral healing comes back because like you learn from your parents. In turn, that's like what is the working of who you are.
And then that
Yeah.
also can translate to children and stuff like that too.
Yes, yes. It's a form of like it's an energy exchange, but it's
Mhm.
also like a development of your psyche, your consciousness. It's everything.
Yeah,
It's
it goes
everything. Yeah.
into the combination
Your
of like
nervous system, everything.
yeah, it's the nature, the combination with the nurture aspect too, the stuff that you
Yes.
learn and traumas that you unfortunately endure along the way
Yeah.
too, but you're also receiving things that you're not fully aware of at the time, like, especially
Yes.
as a child, you don't know that this stuff is happening to
Yep.
you, why you're triggered by certain sounds or
Yep.
certain feelings or certain phobias you may have, like, there's certain things that you're just not aware to at
Mhm.
that age, and it's not a fault of your parents for not knowing that either, because
Mhm.
this stuff wasn't widely taught or available,
Mhm. And
at
we're all
least
human
yeah.
regardless. Like whether it be your mom or your dad, like they're still learning. Like we're human, We can't get mad at them for not being a part of our life or, not mentally, emotionally there for you.
That's one of the craziest
Yeah.
realizations that you start to develop as you get older, where
Mhm.
you finally, where you're, what's the joke they say when you hit 25 and your brain fully forms and everyone's
Mhm.
like, oh shit, it's like your oh
Yeah.
shit moment. Like my parents are real people too. They're not just my
Mhm.
parents.
Yep.
Like this is
That's where
also
you start to learn forgiveness too,
hmm hmm
because that's really important.
is just forgiving them for what they went through and like
Giving them grace too.
yeah, they didn't
Yeah.
know either. Like, you got to
Mhm.
think too. We're growing up in a time with the internet and access to a ton more information than they ever had before.
Yes.
So we're able.
Consciously developing at
hmm
like a more rapid pace. And I feel like the energies of the world too are moving quicker. So,
Everything's fast paced. So it's
yes.
like to keep up with that is very difficult. And I'm curious to know how that relates, like the social media aspect with like even just like holistic lifestyle and balancing that for yourself.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, because there's times like I will post, and then there'll be other times that I don't want to go deep into like that learning is like very spiritual experience because I just feel like some of it is personal
mm,
and some like you were talking about right when we started. And I'm still trying to find that balance because I definitely want to be known on my platform, but I'm also so real to who I am, and I will never not be that to my platform, regardless of where I go in my life. But my content is based off of like self awareness, consciousness, mental health, self love, because I've had to really love myself first before anything. Because then you learn who you are on such a deeper, profound level that then you realize like that's what you can attract because that's who you are and you can value yourself in turn.
Yeah, and I think
Yeah.
that comes across on your social media where you're really just trying to be your authentic
Yeah.
self, and that is like the key when we're getting into even like sharing on social media. To
Mhm.
reference my last week's episode, is like the key is just to be yourself.
It is
Like
just to be yourself.
as
Like,
long as you're sharing what you feel, I think it's going to
Mhm.
resonate with most people. And I think that
and
point I see on your social media.
thank you. And I also think too, like, other people, I've had to learn, like, not to care what other people think of me because in turn, like, I'm doing what's in my best and highest interest, like, for myself and what I believe in. And the more I trust in that, the more I'm in tune with who I am. And I think that stems back from Reiki because Reiki has made me really dive into the deeper wounds that I've had within myself, which is like self-love and just being enough, or just, it's like the
Mhm.
deeper core wounds of who we are, and it stems again ancestrally.
What would you say for someone that is maybe like struggling with some of their trauma and wants to try to dive into like that, like into themselves almost? Because like I know
Yeah.
that is like one of the
Mm.
harder things to like start, is to like
Mhm.
to look within and be like, all right, where is some of this stemming from? What is the things that I could work on? Like, how do you help guide someone to maybe, or maybe some advice that someone might be listening could take to try
Yeah.
to go down this journey?
Definitely taking one step at a time, because diving into it, just from personal experience, it can get extremely overwhelming, but also a support system, finding the people around you. And if you don't have that, um, it takes one little baby step in any direction, whether that be your home life, your physical well-being, your health. It doesn't have to go straight to like that spiritual aspect. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And
Yeah.
even to build off that, there was, I forget how I worded this recently, but when you mentioned taking a baby step,
Hmm.
sometimes that step is backwards. You're not
Hmm.
going backwards, you're taking a step to reflect.
Hmm.
And sometimes that step of reflection is going to help you take 3 steps forward. But
Yep.
you have to take a
A
step.
step.
And I
That's
think
it.
that's an important piece for people to really take from this conversation, and this point specifically, is standing still is going to get you nowhere.
Mhm.
Staying where you are is going
It's
to get you
also like a
nowhere.
safe thing for people, and like you hear yourself talk about it and you're like, okay, something needs to be done, but we are the only people that can do that within ourselves. Someone can be here and validate something for you, but in turn, like as a life coach, I can guide you, but there's only so much I can do. It's not like where therapy like breaks down into other more deeper things going on, but it's it is a guidance system within yourself, and then you start to form a relationship there. And
Yeah.
that's like coming from your heart too.
Where do you distinguish the difference between like lifestyle coaching and where a therapist could come into play? Because I know that's some of the
Mm,
debate between lifestyle coaching and therapist. And I'm one of the people who's actually, in the future, I'm considering lifestyle coaching because
yeah,
I feel like I don't want to go back to school to be a therapist. I totally
yeah.
missed that boat. I don't want to do that. I didn't miss it. I could do it. I know people said you could
Mhm,
go back to school if you want to pay my college bill.
mhm.
Then maybe I'll go back to school. But,
Yeah.
but I've always enjoyed. I mean, even the way you say that, like I hold the space for people. Like I
Mhm.
enjoy that style,
I do too. Yeah.
and I'm possibly looking into the future about getting into some type of lifestyle coaching. But for me personally, I just want more life experience.
Yeah.
Like I want hopefully one day to be a father and have children and
Mhm.
stuff, and I want to,
And be an influential person in somebody's life.
yeah, I want to have that experience before I wanna embark on that, and, um, that's what I tell myself at least. I mean,
Mhm.
who knows when you're called to do something, you just gotta be ready for it, but
Yes.
where do you distinguish that difference between lifestyle coaching and maybe like a therapist or psychologist?
Yeah. Therapy I think is more deeper wounded healing. And it can stem from just a lot of deeper trauma, where my mom and I are kind of more at the point where it's like functioning to higher functioning, where it's like we'll meet you where you're at and hold space for you. But if you are not willing to move forward and go within and trust yourself that you're able to do this, then I think that's where the line is drawn, like where you might need some deeper healing, like in a in a different setting, I guess. But and that's where like we do have the farm for the horses, and we do want to host events. And I don't know if you've heard of expressive arts.
Not specifically. Not, maybe if you explain it, I might.
Yeah, it's a form of healing.
Okay.
Just like basically it's like an inner child healing where you just draw and you paint and you feel present. But being around horses sometimes can open up that energy and just make it feel very safe for somebody. I think too, like I'm still distinguishing where I'm headed with holding space and trauma, because I'm learning boundaries still, like how I want to distinguish what I want to do next. But I'm on the path there.
That's the key, though.
Yeah,
is being
and I know
on
I'm
the
a
path.
guide, and I know I'm an inspiration to a lot of people, but I can't fix anybody. You know what I mean?
And I think that's like a good distinction to have, and at least to state too, for people that might be in that space of struggle.
Yeah.
Because I think that's where you see on social media where a lot of these coaches can take the wrong direction and try to replace therapy.
Yes.
And that is a dangerous place.
I think therapy is very important. Like I do. If I didn't have my mom, I would be going to therapy. Like, let's be real. You know, like I do think everybody does need some sort of support in any way, whether that be through therapy, psychology, kind of like you were saying, or holistic, some sort of holistic form of help.
Yeah. And as someone who's gone to therapy and I've had a good therapist and I've had a bad therapist, like you have to trust yourself with the therapist. Like it's a little bit like dating. It kind of sucks. Like my first ever therapist, amazing, loved her. The second one I went to, hated it, did it twice, was done. Like you got to just know what the vibe is with the person. Definitely. And it goes to the energy stuff. And you got to, for me with therapy, because this is where my little griff is. I can't think of the word. I don't know if I said the right word. I guess my struggle with therapy lately has been the overprescription of therapy in our society, where we're holding people back by forcing them to continually talk about their problems instead of giving them a guide to move forward.
And that's where like the life circle comes in. Like you have to, whatever area you're developing in, like you have to like move forward in that direction. You have to get past the breakthrough. Like for me, for example, right now in my life, it is talking like this, like with somebody else, like opening up, being vulnerable, but also putting myself out there. Because before I was holding myself back to not put myself out there because of the stuff I've been through and trusting myself. So
now
that's
here
just
you are.
a little bit of vulnerability right there.
And now you're on a podcast and in front of cameras and will be on social media. And it's a chance to share your story and where you're trying to head. And I think this has been a perfect like depiction of who you are and where you're trying to go. And I know we jumped over some stuff to get to the stuff, but there's so much good stuff. It's hard to, and that's why I allow conversations to just develop and to be what they are. And it's learning how to navigate these different conversations. And as you're going to be with coaching people, you're going to learn to navigate different people and what they're receptive to and what they're willing to discuss. And that's part of whatever business or content or whatever you're trying to cultivate and create, especially when you're working with other people, is learning the skills to understand what makes them comfortable, what makes them triggered, what helps motivate them to achieve their goals. Like it's ultimately being willing to sit sometimes in the passenger seat and watch them drive.
And just listening is huge. I know you know this because you are a podcaster, but people sometimes just need to be heard.
100%.
Most of the time, that's where the problem lies. If someone cannot hold space or be able to listen to somebody, it's almost when you have to look inward again and be like, okay, what is going on here that I can't be there for somebody else? Or because in turn, like all we're looking for is connection and like community to just like speak and share our thoughts in an equal energy exchange. Yeah.
It's the whole reason I started this podcast was to create a space where people, like you said, feel seen and heard and can come on and share their story and not feel judged for what they are. I mean, if you've ever looked at, or anyone on social media has ever looked at my social media page for the podcast, it's a wide range of people who come from all different walks of life. And I wanted this place to always be a judgment-free zone for people to share their story.
And that's what my mom and I are creating on the farm. My mom, my dad, and I. My dad's more the horse person.
It's important to have everyone that does something that can be different, but
Yeah,
overlaps
because
basically.
people really just need to be seen and heard in order for growth to happen.
Yeah, and I think what you guys are doing is potentially going to be very successful because like
Yeah.
it. I've actually recently did I went to New Hampshire. I think it was Harrisville, New Hampshire, and it's not similar to the horse thing, but the like cow cuddling,
Mhm.
and where they
Oh
people
god,
invite
it's
and like I loved it, and it was like a cool. I did it for my girlfriend because she really loves cows,
Mhm.
but like I enjoyed the experience.
Yeah.
It's just like a cool, safe
Mhm.
experience that you're in this space, and it was like a baby
And it's
Highland
sacred,
cow.
like, it's like when you're with an animal, like, you feel that they've gone through a lot too. It's not just, like, you can share that energy with them too, and I think even kids being around horses, and I'm not sure where I'm headed with, like, clientele as far
Mhm.
as, like, who's going to be coming, but it is all walks of life. That's what my mom literally put on the website, so it's pretty cool.
And how is where are you in with the stages of the business currently?
Mhm.
Where are you at right now with it?
So since we've taken a year off, my mom and I are currently, I should say my mom, but she's been cleaning out the cabin area. We have 2 cabins that are up for rent, for like any health and wellness practitioner. Um, so I've done Reiki in one of the cabins. One of them is called Happy Hut and then the Zen Den. And then we eventually are going to be building a yoga like pavilion area to look out and see the horses. So it's a very peaceful experience. And then my dad, he teaches lessons, but he also wants to rescue and retrain horses. Um, because again, like horses have feelings and and I feel like it connects with the human experience too, just because they're an animal, they share very much similar emotional experiences as we do. They just don't talk.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
How about with yourself? And obviously, we mentioned throughout this podcast between the holistic healing, the business,
yeah.
and social media. Where do you see yourself right now, and where do you see yourself going in the next? We could say maybe year, 2 years.
Yeah. So right now I feel like I'm at a pretty pivotal point considering I'm on this podcast. But I'm taking it day by day, and I think I see myself stepping into it more. I feel like I've been surrounding myself with people who have small businesses too, so I just feel like I am ready. Like there's like that pivotal point, and I'm here to like start doing Reiki again and um coaching and like actually having one-on-one sessions because I think too it is more intimate sessions than like group settings. I think we want to do between like that like a retreat would be like 10 people max. Like it's going to be very intimate so people can feel seen and heard
Yeah,
with whatever they're
I
going
think
through.
that's the best way to do something like that is when people start having these large groups and are doing that, it becomes
Mhm.
harder to really connect with each
Yeah.
person because obviously you have a
Mhm.
room full of people. You have to make sure you interact with every single person
Mhm.
versus if you limit the number of people that are coming into the space,
Mhm.
you can better like not get control may not be the word, but
It's
like interact
um
with everyone.
yes, definitely the interaction. And I also feel like I'm back into my horse era. So that's good. Like
Kind
that
of full
inner
circle.
child, it came full circle. Everything's been full circle, but I do want to work with the horses and humans, I think, at some point, because horses have held space for me. So I just feel like I can show that to people who have fear of big animals or just it's a very psychological thing that goes on with an animal.
Yeah, looking back on like your experience at school, do you find like that was valuable at all, or do you see yourself ever going back to something like that?
I find it was extremely valuable because at the point in time, I was also losing a bunch of friends and just like going through a very pivotal time. Um, it was, yeah, I don't regret anything that has happened in my life, regardless of how dark it got. Like everything has shaped the person I am today. And I just now fully trust that whatever is going to move forward with the business will move forward. And yeah, I just see a lot of good things coming forward.
Was the stuff that they were teaching, and because they obviously went for a very specific
Yeah.
major, does that stuff relate to what you're trying to do
Yep.
now? And
It
because I was curious,
definitely
because like I know schools, especially when you get to Maine, New Hampshire, and stuff, they have a
yeah.
lot of like more majors geared towards nature and animals and
Mhm.
stuff like that. So I was curious if that actually truly you could see the trans transition.
connection or
Yeah, like the
the
actual value of the education that they were teaching
I
towards that.
definitely did enjoy it. I think what burnt me out was the relationship I was having with the sport.
Mhm.
It wasn't my authentic self. So I feel like I had to pull away to learn what was. And now all I want to do is literally like hike and trail ride with my horse. Like I just want to learn about the bond between me and that horse because that's originally where I started.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Is
Yeah.
reconnecting with that. I mean,
And showing people that
yeah,
they
there's
can
value in that.
reconnect with their hobby, their sport. It doesn't have to be with horses, but like that's the main I guess like how do you say it? It's full circle. Like
Yeah,
it's the main
that is something that is a beautiful thing to be trying to get people to do, is to reconnect with what made them happy, because we, especially throughout our lives, will
It's who
lose
we
that,
are.
and life just kind of beats you down, whether it's your own personal traumas or just like the negativity of social media or your job you might be in. Like
I used to be called the horse girl, so
I was wondering, like, were you like
Yeah.
labeled that growing up?
Oh yeah, yeah. And it used to get me very insecure about who I was. So I think too that's where I stopped cuz like people were judging me like or I just felt judged.
There's a very negative connotation with labeling someone as the horse girl.
Yeah. Oh, since I was young. So
Yeah, I
But
mean, to
I
be fair,
don't
some of the social media videos that we see out there,
yeah.
like,
At this point though, like I am a horse girl and I'll admit it. I'm true horse girl like at heart. So it is who I am and I feel like I can spread that love to other people through what I do.
yeah, and I think it's a beautiful thing because you're working with very highly intelligent animals, and it's
Yes.
something that not everyone gets to do.
Mhm.
And now that you're able to you've gone through all these different experiences in your life, and that you're able to come back to it with actual joy and
Yeah.
excitement,
Mhm.
that's great, because that's what you'd hope for yourself, I think,
Yeah.
as like a kid, to like
Mhm.
eventually be working with the thing that you truly loved.
Yeah.
And that is like something that I've kind of tried
Mhm.
to value, is reconnecting with the inner self and the inner child
Inner
specifically.
child, specifically that. That's where expressive arts comes through.
Yeah, and
Um,
I really resonated with this point, and we've kind of mentioned it a little bit throughout the podcast, but like the inner child stuff, because when I look back at how everyone has home videos and stuff, like
Mhm.
my dad always had a camera, and I loved being like the center of attention on the camera. I'm like, please record me.
Yeah.
And throughout life, whether it was just teenage years, puberty, all that bullshit, like I did not want any part of social media. I didn't want people to look at me. I just so introverted. And it's weird, as life kind of kept going, how these just magically started appearing in front of me
Yep.
again. And that this kind of became a thing where
Mhm.
I kind of took this like attention based thing that I liked,
Mhm.
but put it on someone else and tried to highlight what they do instead and not make it about me. Obviously, my name's on the podcast, but like I really try to not make this about me, because I want to build, like we talked about, the connection,
Mhm.
like highlight people's stories and make them feel seen and heard, like we've talked throughout this podcast, and what you're even trying to do in your business. And this is a great example of two separate businesses with a similar goal,
Yep.
trying to unite people under that same belief, whether it's spiritual connection or
Connection.
and that
Mhm.
aspect. And I think that's a beautiful thing in what you do as
Yeah.
well. And we are kind of getting towards the end of the podcast, and I just wanted to um I feel like there was one more thing I wanted to ask you, and
know you
I
kind of
lost
been
track of
going.
it too.
You kind of been going.
And it was there was, because there was something, I'm gonna lose it. It was building off that childhood spiritual thing, and I kind of lost track with it. It'll probably come up to me after I stop
Yeah.
recording with you, and I'll probably ask you at that point. Um, but like I said, we are getting towards the end of the podcast, so I'll start tying everything up anyways.
Yeah.
Is there anything specifically that you didn't get a chance to mention? I know I have that one more question for you that I
Mhm.
mentioned off podcast. But is there anything that you wanted to say that's separate from that? I always like to give the guest the chance to say anything that they might have not had a chance to say.
I have always a lot to say. So
That's up to you. If
Um,
you have something else you want to add to the podcast before that
no,
question.
I feel like this was a great development for myself just to like step out of my comfort zone.
I'm very excited to see
And
where you go from this too as
yeah,
well.
thank you very much. I'm excited and I'm excited for you too, just sitting here and experiencing this and bringing in mental health. And I feel like it's so important for people to know that and learn to find the connection within themselves and with other people. So that's very empowering.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you gave it a chance, and like
Yeah, thank you.
you're willing to do something that scare you. I mean, you don't know me and any
Yeah.
of that, and to obviously you didn't know at the time that the tie to
Mhm.
of kind of how we were following each other and stuff.
Yep.
Like so, that could have also been intimidating too. On
Yeah.
top of that, but I'm glad that you were willing to still do this at the end of the
Yeah.
day.
Most of my connections are like very like organic. Like I met one of my closest friends. She lives in Utah.
Mhm.
We met in Sedona, Arizona, and immediately just drawn to each other. And shout out to Megan because I love her. She's awesome, but she owns her own jewelry business.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So
And what was funny was since I obviously had followed you for a long time on social media, that like I wanted to get you as a guest,
Yeah.
but something was just like now was like the time. Like
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just one of those things. Like obviously I book pretty far in advance and stuff.
yeah,
So, like
I believe in divine timing.
yeah, it really feels like that now that
110%.
you've been like talking about it. And
Mhm.
like that's what it really felt like was
Mhm.
like almost like kind of like you manifested like the interaction to do this
Yes.
and I
Because I
think it's been
know,
great.
like, too, without growth, like, you have to step, like, again, like, today has been, like, a theme of, like, this week, actually, has been a theme for me of just, like, stepping in and just trusting, full send, like, step in and trust it, because if not, you're going to hold yourself back. And I will
100%.
never hold myself back ever again.
It's preach. That's fucking facts.
Yeah.
So, Lexi, as we're coming to the end of the podcast, I have that last question for you.
Yes.
What would your advice be for someone who wants to pursue their passion?
I say, I feel like I just said it, but don't hold yourself back for anyone, anything, and just go for it. Like, I just feel like there's no way, or you have to be ambitious and you just have to go for it. Someone told me how brave I was. So I just feel like the bravery aspect, like, you just gotta be brave. Like, yeah.
Perfect. And I would totally agree with that. Is even when you don't feel brave, to still push through that and try to be brave.
Yep. Because
Like,
there's so many times, like, I mean, for example, we had to restart the podcast to start because I'm like, I'm not ready. Hold on.
yeah, and that's fine. Like,
Yeah.
But it's the trying to be brave and being brave. To me, it's the same thing. At the
Yeah.
end of the day, you were
You
brave.
still did it.
And I
And
think
give yourself grace in that, because God, you'll keep breaking through those barriers regardless. It'll get easier.
yeah,
I think I've
and
said that. Yeah.
here we are, and you did the podcast,
Yeah.
and you powered through it. I mean, this has been a fantastic one. I really do appreciate you for making the time to come do this, and I appreciate anyone that sits across from me. And again, just thank you for
Yeah.
doing
And thank
this.
you for having me. This has been a great experience.
Of course. So, for you guys now, if you guys like the podcast, please rate, review, subscribe, share with your share with your friends, share with your family, share with your grandma. Check it out, thecarrollconnection.simplecast.com. Also available Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all the major listening platforms. If you'd like to watch your podcast, go on YouTube, search The Carroll Connection or at Jared M. Carroll, and it'll pop right up for you. And if you want to be a guest or return as a guest, hit me up on Instagram at Jared M. Carroll or at The Carroll Connection, and we'll set that up. So, till next time, guys, peace.